welcome to the Future Print Tech Fest. I'm Carith Kopp. I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Daplin, Product Marketing Manager at Sun Chemical. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Carith.
And we also have Phil Jackman, who is Global Product Manager at Sun Chemical. Hi, Phil.
Okay. Hello.
Thanks again, both of you, for being here with us. Phil, I wonder if you'll kick us off with just a little bit of background on Sun Chemical and why we are talking about digital textile innovation and sustainability today in our session.
Sure, and firstly, thanks to Future Print again to be part of one of your events. And we've been with you for most of the time, but certainly the Tech Fest looks like being another fantastic event, so we're pleased to be part of that. Sustainability is a very common topic these days. I mean, it's quite a well-used phrase around the not just the world of print, but in the world of manufacturing typically. So just want to see really how Sun Chemical's investment and involvement that is really, and then looking at what we're doing in textiles and have a case study for that going forwards really. But first, really just want to have a look at what Sun Chemical does for those that may not have heard of us. We are the world's leading producer of inks, coatings and pigments, and pretty much involved in all areas of print, analog and digital, and pretty much wherever you see colour, you will find Sun Chemical. But I want to look at our digital division really, because that's where this event is focused at. So we aim to be the major supplier of inkjet ink into all areas of print, basically. Where Sun Chemical is today in analog, we're transitioning that into the world of digital print. Been looking at inks for a very long time now, many decades. UV and aqueous goes back well into 1990s. Primarily looking at working with OEMs, developed lots of packaging for inkjet, lots of wide format graphics as well. One of the interesting things was acquiring Sensient last year, not only for their extra portfolio of technology, but also to widen our number of experts we have in our team. So we're now a much more capable company moving forwards. But still, technology and supply partnerships is foundation and working with OEMs. So dealing with the people that make print heads, dealing with the people that make all the print equipment, and then developing the next generation of digital print technology to take us forwards. And we are a global business. We've got several sites around the world where we can manufacture, develop, support customers, and it's all managed as one global business really. So we're fully coordinated, one of the largest suppliers of inkjet chemistry, making thousands of tons of digital ink every year, and probably one of the widest ranges of inkjet ink applications as well. But sustainability, I mean, it's been in the news a lot. People are aware of not using plastics, people are aware of banning the drinking straws, etc., and it affects all of our lives. But it's not just about what touches the consumers. Certainly, it's not just a manufacturing trend. People know, and the trends here will not only affect the way that things are put together, but also the way that things are manufactured and things are sourced. But from the physical product, the brand owners need to think about changing what they do, and that means changes to their suppliers and the supply chain to bring the CO2 footprints down really. So everything's shifting from a linear to a circular economy. We've been quite wasteful over the last 50 to 100 years, and we're starting to realise that we're hurting the planet, and to be able to reuse these things and to get from renewable sources and not be so wasteful going forward is key. Not just to be better for ourselves and better for the planet, but it's better for everything. So redesigning the way that things are manufactured, sourced and developed is a big thrust of Sun Chemical. Obviously, the majority of packaging, and this is quite packaging focused, today is printed analog. So Sun Chemical has a whole raft of developments and sustainability programs in its analog printing ink development. But here we're looking at digital really, so it's only a few percent of digital packaging. So it's not the main thrust of development, but certainly it's something we're starting to design into our R&D process. But importantly, we're starting to follow the UN Sustainability Development Goals. It's not just about the materials. It's not just about sourcing from something that is renewable and not oil-based as a derivative. It's about being good for the planet, and that includes people. So, it's about not having slavery, getting things sourced properly from various parts of the world, etc. Not wasting water in production, keeping your energy down. So it's about the whole package, very, very much developing, not just for the product, but for the whole supply chain that supplies it as well.
Mm.
And then digital printing, like I say, it's not the main consumer or the main contributor to sustainable, but certainly there's already movements within our R&D and within that process to start developing for the future. But one of the biggest selling points of digital in the sustainability field is that you print on demand. You do not print waste. You don't need plates. So inherently, all digital printing has a big sustainability message where you just print what you need to use. So it's not as wasteful. But we are, looking to renew some of the formulations that you're running on mineral oils, both in ceramic printing or coding and marking. Mineral oil inks have been replaced with vegetable oils. So we're starting to move towards more biorenewable content materials. Even UV, looking at some biorenewable content for UV materials. And certainly having the same level of recyclability as analog is also important as well. So looking at, having inks that can be recycled or removed from substrates effectively so that the substrate can be renewed as well, whether that's in sort of page-based packaging or even some of the wide format graphics. You can recycle some of the base media there as well. But also the actual hardware is being changed, moving from mercury-based curing to LED curing. Also has a good impact on the environment as well. But certainly one of the biggest examples at the moment of trying to reduce, not necessarily from how the ink is made, but how the process is made, is really in some of the textile printing, where the consumption of water is much less doing it digitally and doing it direct to substrate, direct to the materials, as opposed to some of the analog methods. And here I'll probably hand over to Simon, who's got a lot more in-depth knowledge in the textile printing digital market. So over to you, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So in general, I think Phil's right. Where we often have a focus is on enabling our customers to be more sustainable, looking at their processes, how we work with workflow to understand where we can have an impact, and that's from sourcing of raw materials all the way through to the finished product, and how we can help change mindsets or ways of working to improve the environmental credentials of the final product. So one thing that people often hear about the textile industry is how polluting it is, how water heavy the processes are. So I just wanted to give some context to why sustainability in textiles is important and why it's a message that people are really choosing to discuss and focus on. So the first one obviously is the water consumption that many people are aware of, and these are all figures taken from the World Wildlife Fund and their World Agriculture and the Environment report. And the textile industry in general, so that we understand, it's the second most water polluting industry in the world, only outside of petrochemicals. So, and it's also a heavy consumption area. So it's using 378 billion litres of water per year. So that's the equivalent of over 150,000 Olympic swimming pools. So you can see already that there's something that we need to start thinking about. 20% of industrial water pollution is already coming from the textile industry. And in particular, dyeing becomes something that's got a lot of focus at the moment, where 200 tons of fresh water is needed to dye 1 ton of fabric. So the ratio of water use to product output is considerable. Textile industry is accounting for 4% of the global fresh water withdrawal from the system. And of that, 8% is used in the printing or decoration of textiles, particularly the printing. Dyeing is probably more under the spotlight because it uses a lot more, but printing is certainly an area that can do better in terms of its sustainability credentials.
Yeah, and I guess, well, you're about to talk about it now. It's something that we're all realizing, as Phil was saying, and there's pressure, isn't there? The industry is under a lot of pressure to change.
Yeah, absolutely. So for a number of years, it's started to build in the industry. I think Greenpeace started, or probably 6-7 years ago now, with their strategy to kind of put pressure on brands to understand at least the use of hazardous chemicals and the release of, and how we treat hazardous chemicals in kind of in water off flow and post washing processes. But as that has built, brands have really understood that as consumers, we're really thinking about what we're buying, how we're buying it, how it's produced. And other legislative bodies have become involved, or lobby groups that really understand and are doing a lot of research in the area of sustainability. So, for example, this slide is kind of lifted from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation study that they did on the new textile economy, and it's really takes the whole workflow into consideration in terms of how we produce fibers, how clothing is made, how we use them, and then what we do once it's been used. Right, there's one of the problems or the perceived problems in the industry is the throwaway fashion culture, where garments have become, let's say, a lot more affordable, so people are willing to buy a garment, wear it once or twice, and then discard it. Right, it's become that kind of culture, and in total, that's starting to really have an impact, especially on things like the water consumption, as I mentioned, but also greenhouse gas. And textile production is pretty. Again, the finger is being pointed because the CO2 emissions from textile production is significant. I think you can see here it's several billion tons, 1.2 billion tons annually. And that again, to contextualize, we're producing more carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. So when you think of the pressure on flying and thinking about our flight consumption when we're all allowed to travel again, there's other things that we can do as an industry to start to make a difference.
Yeah.
And then I've used this slide before, but it's a really nice way of looking at it that was done by the US Department of Commerce to understand what is sustainable textile production. Because often we talk about sustainability, but different people consider it in different ways, and it's to try and bring a message together. I mean, they run through all aspects of the supply chain, from using renewable materials that don't deplete the environment, through to using fewer materials and controlling the hazardous nature of some of those chemical inputs, which of course as a chemical company we have a role to play in. Phil mentioned the packaging part of it, and it's not just the production of packaging, but the way we use packaging and the logistics around that. One of the moves in the textile industry in for example, sublimation printing has been a move to use much lower weight of paper for the transfer process. So in sublimation printing, we print onto a paper and then we transfer the image from the paper to the fabric. And we were probably even 3-4 years ago using 150 gram per square meter papers, and the technology there has increased significantly to you have production sites using standardly 40-45 gram papers, down to as low as 22-25 gram. So you can imagine the waste is less, obviously, because the paper that you're discarding is lower in weight, but you get much more in a roll. So if you can imagine, instead of the difference in impact of shipping 1,000 meters or let's say a ton of paper at 25 grams versus a ton of paper at 150 gram, for the same footprint of shipping, you're getting a huge amount extra product shipped. So that can start to have a beneficial effect on the carbon dioxide emissions and the carbon footprint of the process. There's a lot of work ongoing with key stakeholders in the market, like the customers, the retailers. The brands are really the ones that will drive the change and dictate the pace of change.
Yeah.
And then obviously about expanding the life of the product, again, looking at how we make garments, how we color them, the quality that makes people think, okay, I'll spend a little bit more maybe on a high quality product that lasts longer and I get more repeat use out of. And of course, not producing mass amounts of fabric. I mean, we all heard horror stories of certain brands that overproduced at certain times, and because of the exclusivity of the brand, didn't want to sell off inventory very cheap and ended up destroying or sending it to landfill rather than and have a product that's in the market as it was intended. So there's a number of areas where textiles can look to improve on the sustainability credentials.
And so if we're looking at inkjet, like we can see here, you know, all those the CO2, the waste, the water, I mean, this speaks for itself. It's significantly lower, isn't it?
Yeah, this was a study done by Konica Minolta. So again, I'm conscious not just to spurt some chemical numbers, but it really kind of speaks for itself in terms of the benefit that just switching to a digital technology can give, especially in the textile area. So here we see in red what the conventional printing process is, predominantly screen printing in textile versus a digital counterpart. And so we make reductions across the board, significantly in energy, but in terms of chemical use, again, as Phil mentioned, we're using chemicals when we need them. It's an on-demand print process. So we don't need full screens at the beginning and at the end of a production run. We're not throwing away a lot of use. We're putting a lot less down. So inkjet produces a much thinner coating layer. We're reducing drastically the amount of water waste and carbon dioxide. And this is just from changing your printing process, not really looking at the other things we can do with chemistry or process. Literally, just from switching from an analog process to a digital one, we can already start to see significant benefits on the way the technology is impacting the environment or the sustainability.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the pressure groups and the lobbying. I mean, some of that has become very strong, but the brands and the industry is certainly reacting to that and providing guidance and a way to enable more of us to understand exactly what's needed, how we approach the market, how we approach our development. So I just picked out three. There are a lot, but these are three examples of regulations or directives that people have signed up to in order to make the textile production more green. And this isn't specifically for digital technology, but for textile industry as a whole. So the first one is called ZDHC, which stands for the Zero Discharge of Hazardous Chemicals. And they basically work, it's a consortium of brands that came together to decide between them what are the textile inputs or what are the chemical inputs that we should look at more carefully, which ones are hazardous, how can we control how these are used. So the idea is by managing that, they ensure safer products, but also cleaner water and fresher air so that everybody ultimately benefits. And some of the leading global brands are involved in that, including many of the major sportswear brands.
And it is going to take those bigger brands, isn't it, to be the ones, making these commitments and driving that change, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And you see more and more in their messaging, it becomes something that they're talking to the consumer about. So, I mean, Adidas is well known now for a lot of work that they do on recycled polyesters, but a lot of their factories are carbon neutral now, water and energy neutral, because they try and reuse all the inputs through the factory. They recycle and reuse to ensure that the impact of their product on the environment is less. You see brands like H&M now really looking at sustainable collections using even naturally sourced color and things like that. So the future of the industry is definitely going in that direction. But without the brands driving it, you're right, the change will be slower. It's important. And although all of these regulations and agreements exist, one of the challenges for anyone producing for the textile industry is most of those brands also have their own compliance standards and requirements. There's no general standard that says, okay, this chemical input is okay and this one isn't. Everybody has a slightly different version or wants to go slightly further than the other brands, or perhaps isn't changing at the same speed. And so having something universal doesn't exist now. So we're constantly looking at the ways we develop ink and chemistry and process to enable as many consumers as possible to get product that is safe, that is environmentally less damaging than conventional printing methods. I mentioned the Greenpeace detox. I mean, they did a lot of lobbying. I mean, directly outside stores, they put a lot of pressure on the protests outside leading brands, flagship stores, and things like that. About 80 of the global brands committed to ban certain chemicals from their production line by 2020, and by and large that was achieved. And now they're looking at going steps further to take that to another level again. And one of the more recent introductions is what we call an eco passport that comes from a textile regulatory body called Urcotex, and it's the first real independent certification of the chemistry itself. So normally, if you need something to be compliant to certain standard, it's the finished good, it's the garment that you're wearing that's ultimately the thing that's tested. With the eco passport, what they're doing is certifying the chemistry. So they're certifying the ink or the coating or the pre-treatment or a number of kind of chemistry inputs into the process. So that's something that starts to give a direct regulation on the chemistry itself and not just on the finished garment at the end of a process. And this is a schematic that we put together just to highlight one of the ways that we can use chemistry differently or ink in a different way to improve the sustainability even further in a digital process. So although we make big strides in reduction in chemical and waste and water with a digital process, we still rely quite often on some technologies that would be considered non-ideal in the real world. So a typical textile process, if we were taking a cotton, for example, we would take the roll, which has already been prepared for print. It's had a number of bleaching processes and things to make it suitable to print. We then have to prepare that with a pre-treatment to allow the color to fix correctly to the fabric. That needs to be dried before printing, and then we dry it again. And then the majority of digital fashion today is done with a reactive dye process, which requires steaming in order for it to fix. So there's chemicals in the pre-treatment that are working under steam with the dye so that the dye fixes to the fabric, so that you have something that has the right durability and wash fastness and everything that you would expect from a finished garment. And that steaming, in the case of cotton, is for around 8 to 10 minutes. So it's quite a lengthy process. You need to generate steam consistently for that. So you can imagine it's a water input and a significant energy input as well. And then after you've fixed the dye, your limitation on fixation is how much dye reached certain parts of the fabric in order for it to react and fix to the cotton. And so we have to apply a post-wash process to remove any dye that didn't fix and any chemicals from the pre-treatment that you don't really want on the finished garment. So again, a fairly water-heavy process. And of course, it's not just the water, it's all the chemistry that you're washing off the fabric needs to be treated in some way before you can then release it back into the water systems. So many big textile factories have water treatment facilities on site because of the large amount of production that they do. So you can imagine, again, lots of chemistry, lots of water, lots of energy that's input into the process. Now, recent years have seen a lot of development in two areas to try and combat this and have what we call a dry process. So one for printing, let's say, natural fibers like cotton, and one for polyester, where we're removing that need for water in the post-process. So there's been a lot of development of pigment inks. So pigment inks work in a very different way. It's a physical binding. So we have the pigment, which is providing the color, and a resin there that's job is to stick the pigment to the fabric so that you still get the wash performance, the rub fastness, the integrity of the final garment. But we don't need a water process to fix that. So we can pre-treat the fabric again to control the drop and make sure we get good image quality, print that, dry it, and fix it just with a thermal fixation through an oven. So although the energy input's there, it's pretty efficient in terms of its energy use, and we're removing completely the water input. There's no need for steam in the fixation. There's no need for a post-wash. Similarly for polyester, we've been able to develop technology that allows, instead of using a paper transfer process, for you to print directly onto the fabric without losing the color, without losing the sharpness and the detail that you get from printing on paper versus printing on a much more porous and different structure of a textile. So by controlling the chemistry, again, we're able to remove any steam or post-wash requirement. So you have a completely water-free process, no other need for a post-treatment. So you're not only saving on water and energy consumption, you're simplifying the workflow, and you're enabling kind of people that don't have free access to large volume water supply to use the technology in a better way. And with everything that's happening globally and the talk of bringing production closer to the consumer, these low water, lower impact kind of printing technologies will enable that to happen faster, because the chemistry is allowing those companies to really bring a fairly simple workflow without huge and expensive steamers. So, I mean, the steamers are significant investments. You're talking millions of dollars, and very, very sizable. So the footprint of the factory, there's only certain parts of the world that have the capacity to deal with that. And I just wanted, if it's okay, to highlight the role that the ink and the technology kind of brings to this, because it's quite complex. And ink is not a simple thing. We have to balance a lot of chemicals and chemistry together in a very controlled recipe, but we also then have to enable that to jet through very complex print heads, which are, I mean, the evolution in print heads is amazing. And one of the reasons that we're able to deliver more complex and more clever chemistry is because the digital technology in general has improved so much in recent years. But we have to balance all these materials. So if you can imagine, if you're printing onto a textile that you're not going to wash after the end, you have to be very careful with what chemicals you're putting in there, from a usability point of view, from how safe and how clean they are, but also from the fact that if a consumer buys a garment and then they put it in their washing machine at home, that they're not going to get leaching of color or degradation of performance over time. And also that if it's, for example, on a flag or an outside banner, again, that you don't get lots of sun degradation or migration of color when it rains and things like that. So the chemistry has to be controlled and the right one. So when I mentioned the polyester process, you can't just take a transfer sublimation ink for paper that's designed for paper and expect it to work perfectly on a fabric without needing to wash it, because a paper and a fabric are completely different. When we're printing onto a paper, we print the paper and we dry it. And then really the dye is the only thing that transfers from the paper onto the fabric. When you print anything directly to a textile and you're not going to wash it at the end, all of that chemistry is there in some way. You've applied all of these components to the fabric, not just selected ones. And so it's really important that we understand what each does from a regulatory point of view, how it conforms to those standards, how we meet the brand legislation requirements without compromising the quality of the final product. So it's a lot of things to try and balance from a technical point of view as well.
Mm.
And I quickly wanted to just to share a case study example of where we used that direct polyester print process versus a conventional method or a method that requires that steaming and washing process at the end. And you can see here the energy consumption. So the product we're talking about is Elverjet coral. So you can see we essentially reduce the energy consumption by 50%, the water consumption by 87%, and the production residues, so the things that were washed out or could be washed out that needed post-treatment, by 86%. So by tuning the chemistry and process, we were able to provide a technical solution to the customer that drastically changed how their product could be perceived and how they manufacture in terms of a more sustainable workflow. And then finally, I just wanted to finish on really mentioning the need to balance the market needs. So we've talked a lot about sustainability, but the reality of the world we live in today is sustainability is one consideration amongst many when brands are talking about product and we're consuming product. So it's not only sustainability, it needs to be economically viable and have the right kind of quality. That means that consumers are going to buy it. So we talked about the sustainability impact that we can have. Economically wise, digital allows us to remove a lot of the inventory. As Phil mentioned, you can print on demand. We're not reliant on 3-month lead times from Asia, where huge amounts of stock are generated in the hope to sell them around the world and place huge orders. If we bring production closer to the consumer, we can react to consumer demand and provide print as and when it's needed rather than in bulk, which often leads to kind of non-sold, non-worn and destroyed items. So it removes that and removes a lot of the costly processes involved. And of course, it's really important that whatever solution we come up with from a printing point of view, it can't compromise on the quality that consumers expect. You have to maintain the sharpness of color, the uniformity, the reliability and performance, and making sure that the prints have a quality and they last for a length of time, so that if we're going to encourage people to buy less product but pay more for something that lasts them a bit longer, that it really is a quality item that they're buying. And that's the end of our slides. So hopefully it gave you a kind of a view of how the chemistry and the ink technology can really start to make an impact on the sustainability credentials in textile printing. Yeah, absolutely. And it was such a great insight, because it's a complex one, isn't it? It's a complex industry, textiles, when it comes to the sustainability side of it. And of course, the formulation of ink, there's different materials, there's different substrates, there's a lot that goes into it. And we do need that that focus on sustainability, that R&D in the different areas that will really start to make an impact. So thank you so much for that fantastic overview of the industry and what you guys are doing as well. Yeah, I think I'd love to ask more questions, but we are out of time. I'm going to conscious that we're running slightly over, so we will leave it there. Thank you so much, Simon and Phil, for being with us, for coming back to Future Print events. Pleasure. Thanks, Gareth.
Thank you.
Okay. And thank you everyone for watching this session. There are more great sessions from the Future Print Tech Fest, but bye for now.